Okay, my clock says 3:30, so let's go ahead and start this. I'd like to welcome and thank Senator Shewmake for coming and joining us to answer questions. Our procedure today is going to be fairly simple. We're going to ask that you all stay on mute, except the senator and actually me. What we're going to do is ask you to put into the chat your questions, and then we'll just take them in order as they come. And that'll give her a lot time to answer them. And if you have any follow-up, please let it go back to the chat. That would be very appreciated. We're going to concentrate on somewhat on past legislation, but we're also going to focus on what is anticipated for legislation in the housing area coming in this next session. So I'm assuming, and my hand will be in here a lot looking for it. So if everybody's got themselves on mute, that we have, I don't know how many people have joined us. Robin's here to keep me out of trouble with the computer. So if you want to start entering your questions, I guess I can start and just talk about what what I asked you before when we were just chatting beforehand. What is the timeline as far as new bills being introduced or available for public scrutiny, that kind of thing. I'm not the efficient or the knowledgeable person that some of these people are.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shewmake. I'm a state senator from the 42nd district, which is if you go from like downtown all the way up to the border in Whatcom County. If you live kind of south of town and in Fairhaven, you're probably in the 40th, but I'll make great policy for you too. I'm thrilled to be here talking with the League of Women Voters because the first time I ran, I wanted to talk about climate policy and childcare, and the community wanted to talk to me about affordable housing. And that was 2018, and it's only gotten worse. The solution is we have to build more housing, and that's not the only solution, but we have to build more housing at the market level. So that's developers coming in. You might not like that system, but it's the system we have. And if we want to get things going and impact people's lives, we got to figure out how to work with it. But there's also a segment of our population that just isn't going to be able to afford market rate housing. And so we need to build subsidized housing as well. It's cheaper to keep people housed than it is to deal with a whole bunch of ER visits. I think it's more humane, more productive. And when you think about kids that are homeless through no fault of their own, there's a moral imperative, as well as, frankly, like the best resource that we have as a society isn't the gold, it's not the land, it's the talents and the wonderful ambitions of our people and the things that we can come up with. And so investing in that next generation is often something that we have really good evidence from the economics literature that it pays dividends. So if you want to follow housing bills, I'll tell you that late August, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on right now. Legislators are working on their bills. We have pre-filing in December. And so you'll start to see bills coming through. If you go on to ledge.wa.gov, you can see the bills that were introduced. And then they kind of sit around until the start of session, which is, I should know this, but I think it's like January 13th-ish, around there. It's on my calendar. If you've asked me if I want to go somewhere with you, I'm like, I got to check my calendar first because it tells me what to do. I can't keep track of it otherwise. So this is on my calendar. And then you'll start to see more bills come in. And there's some deadlines that we come up with just to help organize our work. But you'll see like a flurry of bills come in kind of that first week of session. There's also bills and ideas from last year. So you could also go to last year's bills and look at the ones that didn't pass. And you might say, Sharon, I really liked that transit-oriented development bill. Is it going to come up again? And I will say, yes, it will. It's an important policy. And often those are introduced again. Sometimes with no changes, but often as a result of conversations that have been having in the interim. So this is a great time to tell me what you think we should be doing. Hearing from you to level set what we did in 2023 was really the year of housing. And this year was we work on a 2-year budget cycle. So this year was kind of the addendum to it, where bills that were alive last year or in 2023 were still alive in 2024. They're no longer alive now. They could still be copied and pasted into a new bill. That's perfectly acceptable. But the big things that came out of 2023, I think the biggest was the missing middle bill. And that says that cities Bellingham size and larger have to allow for fourplexes in residential areas with an additional 2 units if they're affordable. That means that I live in a single family neighborhood. I live in a single family home, but I live in the lettered streets, and almost none of the homes around me are actually single family. And I think it's lovely. I absolutely adore my neighborhood, and it's the neighbors that make it. We can walk places. My kids have like a little, we call it the Pentagon, like a set of streets that they're allowed to go to without anyone, because they're not crossing scary streets, well, that I think are scary for them to cross, that they're allowed to go to and visit their friends. And it's just very like adventurous and community oriented and lovely. And I think a large part of that is because we have all these duplexes and smaller apartment units and kind of this nice mix. And if you've ever walked around the lettered streets, you'll be like, oh, this is really quite lovely. And people come in, I found out there was a group of Ferndale folks that'll come in and just walk around the lettered streets with their dogs and having a nice urban day. And I love that. I love that about my neighborhood. And so I think this gentle density is something that you can do while enhancing your neighborhood and enhancing your community. And also, one of the things that was really important to me when I found a place to live in Bellingham is that my kids don't just know the kids of other college professors. They meet people of various economic backgrounds. And when you allow for single family homes to be in neighborhoods with ADUs and apartment buildings, you get that mixing. And we see from the evidence that that's really good for kids as they grow up, because they see different kinds of families and they have different kinds of opportunity. And when we all close off by income group into different kinds of neighborhoods, we're not expanding that opportunity. So we did a lot of what we did was kind of mandating a little bit more inclusive of zoning. So fourplexes in more neighborhoods, all cities, so not just larger cities, but the small cities as well, have to allow for accessory dwelling units. So they're allowed a detached and a detached by right. We removed some red tape around condo laws, around condo liability. We did some condo insurance reform. And then I think another big piece of it that we did is we put some money towards planning departments, because we heard that sometimes the permitting time would take a long time. And we want to do permitting right. We want to make sure that you're not, building with dangerous materials and that your electric work is well done. Nobody wants to see homes that aren't safe to live in. But let's make sure that these things are speedy and timely and not just sitting on a desk for a year, which increases the cost of that housing. So I see a whole lot of questions in the chat. Do you want me to just, Donna, are you going to ask them to me?
Well, I'll just read them out loud so that you can, so that everybody knows what they are. The first one is from Robert Mittendorf. There's been some talk on community action on junk fees. Could you describe what those are, and if the state legislature is considering any measures in that regard?
Yeah, we had a bill last session limiting pet rents. So, if you rent your house and then, does it matter if there's a cat that lives with you? And sometimes there is, right? Like animals, kids also damage homes, I'll tell you that. But kids and pets can sometimes, depending on the pet owner, I had a little fluffy dog for a long time, like he was 10 pounds. The only thing he damaged was my socks. But sometimes larger dogs, but not to discriminate against dogs. Sometimes the dog owner, dogs just have different personalities. And so I've moved into places where there was like tons of cat hair left over even after they'd cleaned. And so they can be damaging, and I understand that, but I think that should be like, we should put some parameters around some of this pet rent, because some of it really was trying to extract additional dollars from people, not necessarily actually covering the cost of those additional pets and those additional entities living with you. So that was one of the pieces we looked at. It was a little bit tricky to get right. We've also had also we had a bill saying that if there's, oh gosh, I'm going to screw this up, but it was a Jamie Peterson bill, I believe. And it was, if they make you have concierge garbage service, they can't attach that additionally, right? Like that should be, if you have to use a certain kind of service to live there, then that should be included in part of your rent. It's not something that they can tack on once you've already agreed to live in that place. I think for me, the key is I always get irritated by airlines when I see the price and I'm like, oh, this one's 400, and then, you know, Alaska's 500, but then there's $200 worth of weird baggage fees. And like, if you're upfront about it and it's obvious and you're able to make that comparison, fine. Like, people should be able to have those choices. But when you're putting those pieces on after somebody's already made that decision, that's where it really gets a little bit trickier. And it starts to feel like they're just trying to nickel and dime you instead of being fair and upfront about it.
Okay, Annette has one here. I think that some legislation was passed last year to encourage or enforce local jurisdictions to change zoning zones to encourage more density. Is that correct? I think that's what you were talking about earlier. The legislation for the missing middle is what I'm thinking of. How are cities responding to these changes? How long before we will see any results?
Thanks. And thank you, Annette. This is a great question because it is a long, it feels like, you know, I kind of joke, but it's not really a joke. Everything in government that's cool takes 10 years at least. Whether it's, you know, a library or a new reserve, it probably takes citizens 10 years to actually get it. So the way that we did this is it doesn't change it as soon as we implement the bill, because cities need to plan. They sometimes need to think about the infrastructure, about how many fire stations they're going to need, about whether or not they need to build new schools. And so we have this 10-year planning process through the comprehensive plans. So this year is the year that Bellingham is working on its comprehensive plan, and it's going to have to incorporate some of that missing middle. Some of the other counties are on different cycles, but the majority of counties are doing that planning this year, and they're taking input in that. So go and look for your city's comprehensive plan, and you should be able to have some input in it and tell them what kind of things you want to see in it.
Okay. Barbara Plaskett, her question was, we don't have a shortage of luxury housing market rate. We need more workforce housing. Please explain how we will increase the amount of housing for $30,000 to $60,000 income ranges, and how are we going to make sure the workforce will be able to access this housing?
So it's a mix of types of housing types that we need. So one piece is we do need the subsidized housing, but also if you don't necessarily qualify for the subsidies, you're like, well, where's the housing for me? And so one of the things that I point out is in economics, we talk about this as the filtering model, but I think of it as more as the Alamo. So if you've walked around where Western is, I always walk by this building called the Alamo, and I can never remember exactly where it is, but I always see it if I go a particular way. I don't remember the streets, but I can find it for you if you walk home with me. And it looks like it was a beautiful building back in the day. And from students that have lived there, they say it is not particularly beautiful right now. But one of the things that we see happening is that these new buildings get built up. And I mean, I don't know what luxury means for a building. Usually it just means nice countertops, and it usually just means new. It's usually a marketing term. But an example would be the apartments on the waterfront. Those are going to be really expensive, and they're built new. But what we see is that in 10 years, when they start to get old, they start to sell for a discount. And so that's a really important part of that building market, is that there's a combination of new buildings. We're continuing to build new buildings, and those are going to be the more expensive ones, just like new cars are more expensive. I bought the first new car ever that I'd ever bought in 2019, and that was it was my husband's car. But all my entire life, I've bought used cars because they're cheaper. And we see the same thing happening in the housing market. One of the big reasons that we don't have enough housing today is that after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, we kind of just stopped building apartments, especially. And so we don't have as many of those older units available for people in those moderate income ranges to be able to get. The other thing too that's really important is we have to allow for this more affordable things to be built. So I don't think the price of land is going to be going down in Bellingham or Whatcom County. But so if a lot is going to be $400,000, which is on the high side, That may never be affordable because then you still have to build a house on top of that, right? But what you can do is if you make it a fourplex, suddenly now you only have to own a fourth of that land, and that becomes a place where you might be able to get affordable. So allowing people to build density on more land is also an important part of that. If you maintain that everyone has a minimum lot size that's actually pretty big, first of all, it requires that we sprawl out our city and that everyone has to drive longer distances, which is more carbon emissions, it's more wear and tear on our road, which is harder for cities to maintain and finance as well. But it also means that we're not able to see that mixing of incomes that we know is really important. I think for our communities, like kind of for the social health of our community, but also for the economic health of our community.
Is there any particular housing or any encouragement in a bill that's offering some kind of financial encouragement for people to build or redo those kinds of things? Is that something anticipated in the legislature this year?
So one of the things that we've been kind of tinkering around with is the multifamily tax exemption. And so there's different ways that you can use the multifamily tax exemption. If you just build a multifamily home, which they use this a lot in Seattle, and we use it some here, you don't have to pay property taxes for the first 8 years. If you make some of it affordable and the numbers, I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but a certain number of units at certain levels of affordability, then you can get a tax exemption for 12 years. And so we're able to use that policy to kind of be the carrot to build for some of those more affordability levels.
Okay. Minda Ray's asking, what do you think should be done to further further control rent rises? Encouraging landlords to stay below 8% still allows rises that are insupportable for many.
Yeah. I mean, I think the solution to that is we have to build more. Like we're in an economy where the person that owns it gets to set the price. And so some sort of like rent control where you can't increase it more than a certain amount. What we see over and over again in cities that do that, it's great for the people that are able to get the rent control, but once they need to move, the other prices end up going higher than that. And so we don't see that kind of turnover. We don't see a good allocation. It's not in solidarity with landlords that I make this comment. It's looking at the research and looking at the experience of what happens when we try and control the price of housing and how that influences the supply of new housing. I think one of the things that's really important too is that when we look at measures like, I mean, I'm an economist, so these are my biases. But when we look at economies like that, I have an obligation not just to the people that are in housing now, but to the people like to our kids and the people that are going to want to move into housing and the people that are going to want to move into larger houses or smaller houses and be able to have a vibrant economy for everyone. And we see that rent control doesn't deliver that. But if we can build more, then that does lower prices. Go Google Austin, Texas, and what's happening in their housing market right now. They're seeing, the economists call it a softening of the market, but they're actually seeing price decreases in the price of rent because they overbuilt. I wouldn't call it overbuilding. I think that's great building. But because there's so much more supply on the market, it becomes the tenants market instead of the landlord's market. And that's what I'd like to see. Sometimes we talk about that as housing of abundance. We want to build so much housing that they have to lower the price for you.
Okay. Charles Kemp, what, if any, conversations have you had with Whatcom County Council about possibly closing of 22 North?
This is their decision and working with Opportunity Council to figure out what to do about it. I've been kind of following those discussions, but I do think that permanent supportive housing is an important part of our homeless response. Addiction is messy. And so making sure that that Opportunity Council has the resources they need to do the staffing, keeps people safe, and making sure that they have the support to figure out how to make sure that we're keeping people housed is really important.
Okay. Lara Welker has this question: what's happening with implementing House Bill 1998, which allows residential development within individual rented lockable units where residents share kitchen facilities with other units, sometimes referred to as boarding housing or similar terms?
So we did pass that bill. I think gosh, I don't know all the different pieces of this, but I think that does have to go then part of that comp plan process. And I think this is another great solution. Sometimes I like to watch old sci-fi, and what is it, like The Man from Tomorrow or something? It's about an alien that comes down and they're in DC. And the part that I love about it is they're living in a boarding house at the time. And to me, the boarding house looks amazing. There's this woman and her kid, and they all have meals together. And I was like, why am I cooking for my family? Why can't I live in a house where one person cooks for multiple families? This sounds fantastic. But it also allows for, you know, a little bit of autonomy, but still having shared spaces. And we see that can really lower some of the costs of those rentals. I was talking to a property developer in Bellingham who has some of the housing downtown. And some of those commercial spaces could be converted to housing, but where the bathrooms are is sometimes really tricky, because where you put bathrooms for an office isn't necessarily in everybody's individual office, but you usually have a bank of them. So could you have people living in individual units, but sharing bathrooms? And could that be a way to save money on housing? Those are going to be selling for much less than they would be if they had individual bathrooms and kitchens and all those other pieces inside. And I think that's a great way for especially young people or maybe older people who are not raising children to save a little bit of money on rent and being able to use that money for other things, or having just a little bit more space in their bank account. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. I think one of the things that we need to do with housing is make sure that we're not mandating everyone have a particular type of housing, but instead have as housing types as diverse as our communities are.
Okay, I have a couple of questions here. I'm not quite sure what the things were. I know Barbara Plaskett commented about the fact that we have plenty of luxury housing, but not workers housing, and calling that the theory of trickle down housing, and just like trickle down income. And Robert and Terry, I'm not sure what your questions are, so I'm going to go on to the next one, but if you'd give me some more comments, we'll go.
I think they were referring to the Alamo. I couldn't remember exactly where it was.
Is that what the address was? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Because since I'm not as familiar with that, I'm a transplant. Anyway, yes to more housing. This is from Laura Welker. Yes to more housing, and also more types of housing and housing arrangements, including shared housing for people who would like that. And that goes back. Okay. Maya Morales. What can the Washington legislature do to embrace and accommodate the fact that we have a growing number of people living in RVs, vans, and cars? I was shocked to learn that a baseball rental fee for parking spot could be up to baseline, not baseball. Baseline rental fee for a parking spot could be up to $700, not even inclusive of water or energy. Many folks living out of a vehicle can't even afford that, which means they cannot save to afford to move in fees on stable housing. Can Washington legislature do anything legislative to ensure that people living in vehicles have extremely low fee park places to park, survive, and save money?
We put money in for a safe parking pilot. That would have been in Ferndale, and we ended up having to change the scope of it just because they weren't able to figure out exactly how to get it to work. I think the faith communities actually have an opportunity to really step up here. It's not always an easy thing to get right. I think this needs to be publicly provided. And I know that our cities and our communities have been working on trying to figure out a place to do this and ways to make it right. And it's just been hard. But if other people want to do a nonprofit and want to work with something like Ferndale Community Services to figure out how to do a safe parking pilot or a safe parking project. I visited one in Vancouver, Washington that, wasn't like a lovely place to live. It was probably not as nice as the Alamo, but it was also better than the alternative of being less safe. It was a safer place to live. And I think that's really important for trying to help people as much as we possibly can as we wait to build more and more homes so that people can have more and more opportunities.
Okay, this is from Barbara again. The real estate and building industry have a study coming out that says they cannot build lower income housing. They just can't get it to pencil out. So again, I ask, how are we going to provide housing for, the $30,000 to $60,000 income? Let's put aside the trickle down housing theory. We need public and private partnerships to achieve housing in this price range for people who earn too much to get help and not enough to pay rent. What work are you doing to get these partnerships going?
So trickle-down housing is not a term in economics. So trickle-down economics is this idea that if you cut taxes for the very wealthy, they'll do so much better that everyone else will be lifted up. We didn't see that resulted, it was a hypothesis. We didn't see that it actually came through. Trickle-down housing is not what I'm discussing here. This is actually working through market mechanisms, and it's been pretty well documented that building more does lower housing prices. Just like in the pandemic, when the price of hand sanitizer went through the roof because suddenly everybody wanted hand sanitizer, it's no longer $20 for a little container of hand sanitizer anymore. And that's one of the reasons why is that we saw that supply response. The housing market would like to, so this is a documented response that we see in our lives every day. It's harder to see with housing, and I get that because we often see housing supply responses in places where the prices are already high, right? Like you don't build in the middle of Kansas where nobody, where there's not any business and it's just cornfields. You build in places where there's lots of jobs and where there's lots of opportunity and amenities, like, you know, the beautiful things we have in Bellingham. And so it's kind of like, you know, I put my umbrella up because it's raining. When I put umbrellas up, does it cause rain? It's, you know, working that causality out is a little tricky sometimes. And so there's been pretty good evidence that, and I can bring you the papers and the citations, that when you build new units, it lowers the cost of housing, even just in that neighborhood, which I think is amazing that we can find those effects. But you also see it, I mean, Austin, Texas is a great example. You can look at cities that have been building more, that haven't has a restrictive housing, and the price of housing does tend to be lower. What are we going to do on the workforce? I just think it's that more types of housing and more opportunities there. There are some things that we've been doing as well on trying to make sure, a good example of this is in Blaine. East Blaine, their urban growth area, could potentially be new single family units and some multifamily. But they need to build out a lot of infrastructure to try and connect those places to sewage and whatnot. And so it's been a hard nut to crack in trying to help the city of Blaine do that buildup so that we can see those homes. And we haven't quite figured out how to do it yet, but we're still working on it.
Okay. Next question from Catherine Chambers. There's a fair question regarding crime use in apartment buildings, but there is not a collaborative effort happening in the city of Bellingham, particularly with the police, and therefore the residents are left to deal with the issues that arise because of it. Supportive housing is promoted, but not really happening here.
I don't know how to answer this, Catherine, but I'm happy to talk to you. I guess I'm not quite following. If there's crime use happening in apartments, I mean, that's definitely something that we should be talking about with law enforcement. I mean, one of the things that you see happening in apartments sometimes is everybody's living on top of each other and they can irritate, you know, humans can be irritating to one another. I get that. I think that's another one of those reasons that we also need to see things like cottage clusters that give people a little bit more space. ADUs. I'm a big fan of RV parks and manufactured home parks. I've had family members that have moved to a manufactured home park. It's something that they own. It's something that they have a little bit more space. They have a little bit more quiet, but they can still have access to community, even if they're in a tiny unit. One of the things that we've been doing in the legislature, though, is making sure that there's protections for the people that live there. They call them mobile homes, but they're not often very mobile. And so if you're plunking down $60,000 to have a mobile home in a park, you know, moving is not like if they increase your rent, your lot space, there's not really a whole lot that you can do. And so you're particularly stuck there. Even more so, I would argue that you can be stuck in an apartment complex as well, but even more so in an RV park. And so we've been working on some of those protections and also looking at a co-op model where if the residents want to buy their park, do they get the first right of refusal? And then are there ways that we can bring in some capital, some low cost capital so that they can actually buy that park together and then be able to be their own landlords together as a community. And I think that's a great model, but also we just need more parks. I think we need more of these parks to make sure that people have more choices and there's more opportunities there to live in this way. It's not the way that everyone wants to live, but it's a way to have your own space. It's dignified. And as someone on the campaign side, whenever I find a manufactured home park, I get really excited because that's a whole bunch of voters close together. And sometimes you really see a lot of community in those parks too. It can be really quite lovely.
Aren't there several though in Whatcom County where they either are owned? I'm thinking of right next door to me, James Street Estates is owned that way. Also, there's one that went private or went to became a condo of sorts in the Happy Valley neighborhood, I think. And then I know of one also down on off of Samish Way that's also set up that way. So there's already several that have either been that way for a long time or just recently became that way. So, okay. Next question. From Maya Morales. What is your response to renters who have been begging lawmakers to pass rent stabilization, not rent control? Rent stabilization tracks and regulates rent increases to inflation or to a max of 7% a year and limits the number of times per year that rent can be raised to that threshold. While we must build more housing, that takes years, and the fact is that we are unlikely to catch up to the actual need.
So rent stabilization, so I have a mortgage. We bought just at the right time. I feel incredibly fortunate that we bought that time. And it stays the same for the most part throughout the life of that mortgage, right? Renters don't necessarily have that same opportunity. And every time I moved, even when it was just like a single lady as a student, it was at least $1,000 to move, not just even in fees, just in, the curtains at the other place don't fit the window here and things don't work. Like it's expensive. And so I think you still kind of have that, like once you move into a unit, your landlord's kind of got you stuck. And so that's where I think the rent stabilization can help out there. My big concern is that what does it do to the supply side of that? What does it do to the way that we get out of this problem of high housing rents is people have to build more homes. There's just not other ways to do it. We can do it on the subsidized level, but you look at the cost of building homes and the number of units that need to build, and we would have to increase our budget by at least 50%, if not more, to even just hold water if we're going to try and do it at the subsidized level. So I don't think there's political will to increase the state budget by that much. And so we've got to figure out other solutions where there is political will. So as we look at rent stabilization, I looked through the research on it and it doesn't look great. It does look like it has pretty big supply impacts. So I'm open to the conversation and we've been talking about solutions. I do think that changes in the House and the Senate are going to make it so that it probably has a much higher chance of passing this year or next year. And my goal is to make sure that we don't see too much of a supply side impact, that we're able to make it flexible in a way that means that we're able to minimize that decrease in the number of homes that will be built, because that is the solution for getting out of it. If we don't build more homes, you get into a home now and you have it stabilized for the length of that tenancy, but what if you need to move? What about people who are moving here or moving out of their parents or breaking up in relationships? If we don't see that we're continuing to build new homes, then we are in much bigger trouble in 5 years, in 6 years, in 9 years than if we didn't have that. And so that trade-off between the two is just a really difficult one. And I'm willing to compromise and willing to find solutions, but it's got to be something that works for today and for the future.
Isn't there also just an inhibition on from the builders or developers of these multi units because they look around and say, okay, if we're getting to a maximum number of units you needed, I'm not going to build another one like that. I'm not going to build a multiplex, because there's that they will also self-control in order to keep the rents high. How do you account for that?
So you're describing, in economics, we call that market power. It's kind of like what a monopoly does, right? Like a monopoly, they don't make as many widgets because they want to keep the price of widgets high. And you can do that when you have a really concentrated market, but I don't think the development market is that concentrated. It might be concentrated in certain areas, but we have multiple developers, even just in little old Bellingham, that are willing to come in. If you look at, oh, you know, one of the other things I wanted to mention to Barbara's question on how to make affordable housing is modular housing. If you go Google Wolf Industries, and I swear I don't know them. I saw one of their signs up in town. I looked at the price of an ADU, and you can build an ADU for $67,000. That doesn't include the appliances. It doesn't include the site work. But that is very affordable if you can find someone's backyard to put it in. That is something that if you mortgaged it, even at high interest rates, you could easily pay that mortgage just based off of the rent that you could get under, you know, even under market rents, you could pay that mortgage off. And so I think modular housing solutions are another part of this to hopefully provide, you know, kind of, and some of those ADUs are 2 bedrooms too. They don't even just have to be studios. You can get 1 and 2 bedrooms, ADUs for relatively low prices. So one of the things ideas that we're kicking around is when folks talk to those developers, they say one of the things that prevents them from making big investments and increasing the size of their factory and increasing the number of ADUs that they can build and the kind of getting those economies of scale is they don't know if there's a market for it. So it's still a little bit risky. So could we take some of our housing trust fund dollars and say, we're willing to spend $10 million a year building these modular units here? And could that help kind of de-risk some of that market and get them to build a little bit more and make those investments? And also there's a learning by doing in this space that I think we could try and capitalize on.
Okay. Nicole Tingle. This is her question. I agree a housing mix is important. It's vital we don't ignore the demand for single-family residences. The vast majority of homeowners I represent want a single-family detached home. Due to lack of building new SFRs, the price of resale housing inventory has been increasingly dramatically. Therefore, those families who do not want to share walls are buying further and further out of town, increasing traffic and CO emissions. My first-time homebuyer clients and empty nesters would love to see more options for detached cottage cluster housing, 1,000 to 1,500 feet without HOA dues.
I think those cottage clusters are awesome. One of my students lives in the Roosevelt neighborhood, and I doorbelled her, and she lived in one of those, and she knew all the people in her community, and they were like multiple ages. She was the student, but there were some traveling nurses, there were some elderly folks in there, and they all kind of took care of each other. I kind of joke that if I lose an election or something, I want to be a developer of cottage clusters, because I agree, Nicole. I think those provide a lot of those benefits. One of the ways that we could do it without having to do HOAs is passing the lot splitting bill. That makes it easier for you to split your lot into multiple pieces. That one keeps dying for, I call them stupid Olympia reasons. It's like interpersonal disagreements that don't, there is some hesitation on the policy. I won't say it's all only that. There are some people that are hestant, but I do think that we could get it through if we could get over some of these stupid interpersonal dynamics.
Okay. Vaughn Ochoa, are there particular microfinancing and cooperative housing development group loan programs or offerings that you think look particularly promising? And he says, I apologize if you already answered this question and I missed it.
We did do something on cooperative housing. I don't remember all the details. But if you have ideas on what's needed and what are the barriers there, I'm definitely open to looking at that. I think that's a great model of having a bunch of people figure, like, I mean, it wasn't exactly like a cooperative building, but that's how I lived throughout all of grad school, is that there were just 4 of us that shared a house and we split the rent and we made dinner together, and it was kind of my family in grad school away from family. So I think those are wonderful, and they are another type of housing type that people would like, even if it's not necessarily a formal SRO.
Can you define what do you mean by it? Cooperative housing is just like having a bunch of roommates. Is that what that is? Or is it more of a, some kind of legal definition?
Vaughn, I think, I don't want to speak for them, but I think what it means is kind of the Vienna model where, and people can nod and tell me if I'm right or wrong, or Vaughn can write in the comments. where you have a group of people saying, I just really want to live in a Harry Potter style apartment building. And you get all your Harry Potter enthusiasts or whatever, it doesn't have to be that. I'm picking something silly. And you come together and you design something that fits for you and everyone pays for a portion of it. It could also be the co-op model, like the one, I think there's one in Happy Valley, where people will, I don't know very much about how it works, but I think you can buy into it. And then there's some responsibilities that you have as the community. And my friend's mom lives there. And one of the things that I hear that's great is, I mean, she's getting older and it's a great opportunity for people to be kind of like watching out for her and having that intergenerational connections that I think are really important for our community.
Okay, well, I'm running out of questions here, but I have one other one that you just brought up. What kind of planning or anything toward senior housing for those people who are, can't afford to live in their own homes anymore, or physically can't do it, but are not ready for a, assisted living or that kind of care, co-op sharing or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things where it's if there's barriers to doing that, come talk to me. But it also requires, I used to think my job was to do cool stuff, but it's actually to empower other people to do cool stuff. And so this would be a great opportunity for someone to come up with a program that matches seniors with other folks. I was just talking to Northwest Youth Services, and they were talking about some of their groups of people where, they've kind of aged out of the program, but they still need a stable place to live and they're not quite ready to live in an apartment all by themselves. The mom and me came out, and I don't think they want to live with my kids who are just kind of in full kid loud mode. But I would love to have a younger person, especially as I get older, live with me and, be able to mom out on them a little bit or grandma out on them a little bit, while also having some sort of like sharing of some of the tasks that I can't necessarily do. So I think those opportunities are awesome. And I think this is right for some sort of community innovation there.
Okay. Cindy's a question here. How is the condo liability problem going? Are developers more willing to build new condos?
This is the super depressing thing about condo liability reform, is that it takes a long time for it to trickle through the market. So what we did in 2024, I just heard it, make its way through the market. So in 2023, we passed a law saying that, okay, so condo liability problems are that years ago, there was some bad sheathing that were used in condos, and it ended up, it was the builders, they used the wrong thing for our environment. And it ended up costing the homeowners a whole bunch of money. And so the legislature kind of overcorrected in a way by making it a little bit too easy to sue condos. I don't want to make it impossible to sue condos, but there also has to be some responsibility for maintenance in terms of the HOA and the homeowners too, right? So figuring out that balance. And so what was happening as a result is some of the condos that were built fine were being sued just because you could. And they were settling because it was too expensive to bring it to court for just about what the insurance was. And so as a result of that, you were seeing really frequent insurance claims, which meant the price of insurance was going up. So today, if you're a builder and you call and you say, I need to get insurance for the project I'm working on, the first thing they ask you is it a condo? And if it's a condo, they don't even really want to talk to you, but also the condo liability insurance is really high, which means that we're only building pretty expensive condos. And so if you look around, like what is, kind of affordable or what is not at the high end of the market tends to be apartments because they don't have that same liability problem. So what we did is, I don't want to make it so that builders can build terrible condos and just say, see you later and leave it with the residents. They should have to build to a higher standard, and they should be liable for actual defects. But what we did is we created a right to repair. So if I am your builder and I build a crappy condo, or if I build a good condo, but there's some things that are wrong with it, and that's discovered within 5 years or within a certain amount of time, you can come to me and I can say, oh, you're right, I did do that wrong. Let me repair it for you. So instead of getting that, it creates a more collaborative process that doesn't necessarily require litigation, and that can lower the costs. And this is really important because condos are kind of one of those like first steps on the housing ladder, as well as sometimes the last steps, is you don't need as much space. And so, you know, I've heard from a lot of people like, yeah, I was able to buy a home because I first got into a little condo, and it was that crappy little condo that built my equity and was able to get it. So I did have the down payment for my next house that was much bigger and filled my family and all of these pieces. The problem with the condo liability reform is we did it, but we still need to have builders build condos, hopefully not get sued, and then for the insurance market to respond to that. So the insurance market is small c conservative, not politically conservative, but cautious, and they should be. They're in the risk management business. And so it takes a while. Just like all of this takes a while. I mean, housing is, for most of us, it's the biggest expense in our budget. For me, it's my biggest expense. And so people are cautious when they're going out to build housing, and it's a difficult, it doesn't move immediately, the ship.
Okay. We just had a couple of comments that came in on the previous discussions. One, that Bellingham-Whatcom is working on a shared housing for seniors. So I guess we already have that organization in effect. I should know, I'm quite the senior here. And then Laura commented that there is a resident-owned cooperative model that's used for manufactured home parks, can also be used for single home households. I'm not understanding that one, so I would appreciate any explanation.
Senator Shewmake referred earlier to the model that's being used on the manufactured home parks for ownership. And in my conversations with the resident-owned cooperative folks, they've told me that that could also be used for a single household to co-own and live in one home. In other words, it doesn't have to be multiple homes in a setting like a manufactured home park. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Cool.
I've lost my page here. How long until ADUs private market house the workforce? 2025, 2035? That's your estimate. That's Barbara's comment, asked question.
I mean, we got to figure out, we got to build them. Like it takes people going out and building them and saying yes to an ADU. One of the things that we got in the budget was money for the Whatcom County to create an Office of Healthy Housing, to try and I saw Shenandoah somewhere on this. The idea was that we have like a little weird section of our lot that we could turn into housing, but I have no time or desire to be a landlord. But if you made it really easy for me, I might be willing to. And so could we have someone that says, all right, Sharon, you have a spot, like, would you like to do this? Here are the risks, here are the rewards, here's some pre-done plans, here could do the site work. All you have to do is say yes and maybe put in some capital or agree to these financial terms. And then also tell me how to be a landlord, like, because I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to get the lease or what the rules are. And so could there be some landlord education classes? Another thing that I think could be really helpful is a model lease. I did my PhD in Davis, California, and in Davis, they had a Davis model lease that if you wanted to post on the university's like rental board, you had to use this lease. And it was worked on with housing advocates, with landlords, and with some lawyers from the city and the university to try and figure out something that was pretty tenant friendly. And it meant that everyone had the same lease and we all kind of understood it. Like when the landlord gives you a 60-page lease, they understand it, but you don't always know what you're signing. And that also that if I had a problem with my landlord and I went to go complain to Cindy, Cindy could be like, well, you know, my lease is the same as yours. Here's what's in it. Here are what your rights are. Another thing that it had too was it had a blank space for how much the rent would increase, the maximum amount that the rent would increase within that tenancy per year. And so it, you could have written, well, you could have written different numbers there, but it forced that conversation, which I think is an important part too. It forced some of the conversations around what are the rules for this unit without necessarily having those impacts on the supply side, which I think are really helpful. And so I think that would be another useful thing. We hear from the smaller landlords that oftentimes they're out of compliance with our landlord tenant regulations just because they can't keep up. Not because they don't want to be good landlords, but just because the rules change and they're kind of confusing. And, you know, if you have an ADU, you probably don't hire a lawyer to help you figure out how to rent it out. And so this would be a way to make sure that, you know, they don't have to go get a fancy lease, that they're following the law. And that also makes it easy, and it makes it easy for the tenant to better understand it.
Okay.
I'm here, Sharon. That's Shenandoah. Hi, how are you?
I thought we were talking about it, but then I realized it was someone else that was talking about this, but
Oh, okay.
Okay. Robert came back with a question. What do you think about legislation to limit HOA fees? One of his kids has enough to put down a down payment on a condo, but not enough to afford the HO fees of up to $900 a month, as well as the mortgage. Is there anything in the works that way?
I mean, the HOAs aren't, the HOA fees are going to maintain the property that your kid is buying into, right? So they're going into save for the next roof. They're going in to make sure that those community amenities are properly paid for. I don't think that, like, maybe we could talk about like limiting the management fees, but I actually think what we need is more professional management of HOAs. What I've heard from a couple of people is they buy an older condo, and that older condo, unbeknownst to them, has a $40,000 assessment coming up because for the last 10 years, everyone had low HOA fees and they weren't saving away for the new roof that they all know they're going to need. And so I think making sure that the transparency on those fees is really important, but those fees are going to the maintenance of the house. I think one of the other things that we need to look at with HOAs is some sort of better understanding of the HOA governance. I've heard horror stories of, like, most HOAs are boring by people who are true public servants. They get paid nothing to do it, and they sit through the financial reports and they do this work on behalf of all of them. And bless all those people. Some of them just get like kind of stinky and high on their horse and will come and ticket you for your garbage cans, but not your neighbor because they're friends with your neighbor and their neighbor has the same garbage cans as you. And so I think some sort of like maybe dispute resolution or something along those lines could be kind of helpful there in HOAs, as well as some better understanding of what are the liabilities and some really good communication on that. There is some communication already, but I've heard from some of the cities that, you know, they hear from their residents when they get in trouble, not when things are going well. And, you know, everyone likes to be the person that cuts the HOA fees. You know, that's really popular. What's not popular is when you cut the HOA fees and then, you know, hike out of town and then make someone else deal with the roof that you hadn't been paying for the last 10 years. So I would be really careful about shopping for a house and seeing those low HOA fees. Those could be a bad sign too. Like overly low HOA fees, those could be a red flag. I would be careful about that.
I'll just mention living in a condominium is that the legislature last year, according to our attorney, passed a big change in the rules and regulations that cover boards for condominiums and HOAs. And so there might be some more activity on that matter. There's more in the governance area, but not in the rest of it. Next question. I'm going to go, Annette has this one. Given that many policy changes will take some time to result in more affordable housing in Bellingham to relieve the current situation, is the legislature considering more help for counties to provide supportive shelter for people who are unhoused?
Yeah, so we, in 2023, we put in, so when I started in the legislature, the Housing Trust Fund was about 75 million. In 2023, we put in 400 million. This year, we put an additional 137 million to build affordable units, but also shelter capacity as well. One of the things that we need to do more work on is funding the operations of those shelters. So the city of Bellingham will tell you they can build a shelter, but they also need the staff to make sure that it's safe, to make sure that people have access to services, that they have case management, and all of those pieces as well. And so that is a critical component of that. And I am all in on doing that.
Okay, and I'm just gonna follow up. This is something that Vaughn responded into your, when you were talking about the resident-owned cooperatives. He's referring to a range, resident-owned cooperative models that offer home ownership mobility. Could be the condominiums, in-suite apartments with shared common areas, or cottage clusters, or mobile home parks, or splitting a mansion, or homesteading communities. He said there's for those that are interested, there's webinars from Fin Development Company, or is it just FinDev Gateway, on group loans and microfinancing in the US and South America. And he's been seeing credit unions, bank programs primarily geared towards small businesses. So he's trying to piece together how these financing avenues could bolster the permanently affordable housing development industry. Any other questions? Because I'm running out here. Oh, here, Vaughn's down here, another question. Perhaps we could pair the model lease with the expedited permitting and pre-approved building plans.
The pre-approved building plans is also something that I love. We've been working on trying to get some pre-approved why is it so hard to say? Pre-approved building plans for like fourplexes and missing middle. The more that you can make it easy and faster to build, I think the better. As long as we're making sure that we're not building in floodways, etc. I'm a little sensitive about that after dealing with the 2021 floods. One of the things that experiments that I need to have some more discussions about is Kelowna and BC. They're starting to use AI to do some of the permitting work. I don't want to use it to do all the like really important permitting work, but some of it's like quite boring. I've started using ChatGPT to when I've got a blank when I'm trying to write, or I've been using a new statistical package and I'm just like, I don't remember how to do this in this statistical package. It's been fantastic. So can we use it to do the boring parts of the permitting pieces and make it a little bit faster? Not so much, the developers are probably using it already, but at the permitting desks, could we make it so that instead of one person getting through X number of permits per hour, they can get through 3 times as many per hour? I think that would be an exciting opportunity.
Is there any inhibition to that legislatively or legally from doing that kind of stuff?
I don't know. I'm going to sit down with some folks at Microsoft and hear a little bit about more what's happening in BC. And there may not be anything that we may not need a bill. We just might need a city that wants to experiment.
Okay. Barbara asked another question. What are you going to do to help us protect our watershed from development? We might need new housing, but not in our watershed.
I think one of the important, we all live in the watershed. So we're already in the watershed. But I think you mean in the Lake-Whatcom watershed or sensitive areas watershed. One of the big things that we can do is better stormwater management. The big problem is what happens is when we put a whole bunch of concrete down, now it means that the earth can't necessarily, the soil can't absorb it. And so we end up pushing more and more of that, and it tends up to be a little bit dirtier into our watershed. Multifamily housing has higher stormwater. Andrew explained this to me, has higher stormwater requirements than single family does. So putting multifamily in the watershed isn't necessarily worse than putting single family in the watershed, as long as you're doing the outfront engineering to really think thoughtfully about that stormwater and making sure that you're doing it in the environmentally friendly way.
Well, we're almost at our end of our time. So, and I don't see another, hopefully I didn't miss another question. I'd like to thank you very much and taking your time to answer our questions, and thank all the people who came to ask questions and to listen. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you all.
Maybe we can do it. Oh, there's another message here.
Oh,
she just added it to Lake-Whatcom. Yes.
That's what I thought. I wasn't sure. No, I love it. I love that you guys are here and that everyone's excited about housing, and this is fantastic.
Okay, thank you. And we will close it out.